Welcome to Inspect, a show about web design and web development. I'm your host Ajay, and with me as usual is Kay.
Hey guys.
In today's episode, we're going to be talking about semantics and HTML structure and some of the more recent HTML elements that have been added to the spec and how to use them in the correct way.
Okay. So what is semantics? What's your understanding of semantics or semantic HTML?
Yeah, I suppose we should start on what the sort of definition of semantics is. So, by dictionary definition, semantics is the study of meanings. And so, in a HTML context, that's basically the study of the correct use of certain elements. Um, so, there's various HTML elements which are designed to do a particular thing. You have a P tag for a paragraph, you have a UL for an unordered list, and OL for an ordered list. And semantics is just a case of using those correct elements for their intended use. There was always a common mistake that maybe a lot of beginner developers might make is to wrap all their sort of content in divs or wrap all of their text in paragraph tags, and where it may not need to be like that, and maybe not using the right heading level to sort based on the hierarchy of the page. So semantics is basically just using the right elements in the right place for the right type of content. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think let's go back to when I first started coding HTML, and I think back then I had no concept of semantic HTML or the correct way to use it. I mean, this is before HTML5, right? So HTML4 in its infancy when the web first came about, and so I was like, I don't know about you, but I was creating web pages, using divs, which is semantic anyway, but giving the div like meaningful names, so I understood what that div was, and if another developer took the code on board, they'll understand what was going on as well. So it's about breaking down a page, um, you know, using things like navigation, div class, header, and then inner header, main content, and then splitting up the main content into left, right, and div class, footer, and things like that. So literally giving every single div a meaningful name. And then with the advent of HTML5, everything just got a lot easier. And I think we'll talk about those semantic tags that introduced by HTML5. But things like using header instead of using div class header. The head is understood straight away by the browser and by search engines as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's it really. I think when I first started, I had no concept of it. So I kind of just gave my own meaningful names. Those names are probably really poor, really, really long sort of class names for a div, but I kind of gave myself an idea of what was going on the page.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that's the way it was before sort of HTML5 really came into play, which was back in 2014. Before then, like you said, everyone would, there was divs everywhere, and yeah, we were just creating context by using IDs and classes to name those divs, and then HTML5 came around and introduced a bunch of new elements, and those were there for structuring your content better, and giving a bit more meaning to the content rather than just having everything in this sort of meaningless div container, which is basically that's all it is. A div is just a box without any real meaning to the browser. So yeah, some of the HTML5 elements that were introduced, the main ones I suppose, header, footer, main. There was nav, section, aside, and article. Those are the sort of seven. Is that seven or eight new ones that were introduced? So yeah, I suppose we could just go through each one of those and just give a quick outline about what it's for and where it should be used, and what's the best way to sort of structure your page using those now.
I think I'm probably like a culprit of not really taking much notice of these semantic HTML tags. I'll be honest with you, like when I code pages, usually I'm heavily reliant on what I've already coded in the actual theme or the page template. So whatever I've usually coded in there, I kind of like go along with, and I kind of usually let the content dictate how far the semantics will go on a page. So if there's no block quotes, no use for an article tag, or the aside tag or anything like that, I just won't use them at all, and I tend not to use those particular kind of tags anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we talk about the very first one, header. Um, to me, I've always used div class equals header in my code. So when that came about in HTML5, it was like, okay, brilliant, cool. I know exactly where this goes. At the top of the page. Usually for any kind of my important heading elements, I think my logo would go in there. The navigation will sit in there. Maybe the search bar might sit in the same sort of the same container as well, in the header container. I think those are the main kind of elements that I usually put in the header.
Yeah, and the beauty about things like the header as well is that they don't come with any default styling. So if you have got an existing site which has div class header, you can literally just rename that div to header, and then in your HTML, basically what you would have is header class header. So your CSS will still pick up the class name, but semantically your HTML will just automatically make sense now because it's wrapped in the correct element. So actually upgrading to these more semantic HTML elements is actually quite easy, especially if you have got meaningful classes on everything.
Exactly, yeah.
Of course, if you have got a header element, you don't necessarily need the header class on there as well, because you can, in your CSS you can target the element directly. But the thing with the header, for example, is that you can have multiples on a page, so it is still quite handy to have a class on there as well, because just to differentiate one header from another. But yeah, that's a very quick and easy way to sort of upgrade your HTML, is just to rename some of those elements that you've got, these wrapper elements.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the same goes with the footer. So the footer should be at the bottom of your content, after your main content. It generally includes things like your contact information, copyright information, maybe some like links to maybe like a sitemap or something like that. Some non-trivial pages in your site. Normally has like a link back to the top. So it's basically just a wrapper for the stuff that you'd expect to be in the footer. But again, like the header, you can have multiple footers on a page. And we'll get into that in a second, about sort of the scoping of sections. And but one of the good ones that was introduced, I think, is a nav element.
Yeah.
Which again doesn't actually have any styling attached to it. It doesn't have any children, so it doesn't necessarily say that this is going to spit out a navigation bar. It's just to say that whatever's contained inside this nav element is the navigation for the site. So inside the nav element, you could have an unordered list, or you could just have a bunch of hyperlinks. It doesn't really matter what you've got in there, as long as they are links to other sections of the site. How you structure it is up to you, really. The nav element is just to say that this content is navigational content.
Yeah, no, I think that's that for me, that was like a winner for me, because a lot of the time when I was coding menus, it was always using an unordered list to create them, and you can use them in the body of a page as well. When you're creating lists throughout your page content, but then you've got to use well-defined class names to separate them. One thing I always found was in my early days coding HTML and CSS, just giving these unordered lists the same name sometimes, or sometimes I wasn't giving them a class name, and so when I was coding like the menu, like the main menu, it would affect every other unordered list on the page. So it was about getting really, really kind of granular with the naming conventions for these class names. But having the nav up there, strictly kind of tells a browser, tells search engines that this is like the navigation element for this page and for this site. So yeah, I think that that's a brilliant little semantic HTML.
Yeah, and that's the biggest takeaway, really, that the class names and IDs, they're going to help you with your styling, and maybe, with some JavaScript hooks. But the actual element, these semantic elements, they're going to help the browser know, and search engines especially, know the importance of various bits of content on your page. So you could have a header, for example, which has two lists in it. And one list is being used for navigational elements, and another list could be used for, I don't know, showing some, like, a list of promotions, for example.
Yeah.
In terms of HTML, they're two unordered lists, but by wrapping one of them in a nav element, it just tells the search engine that these are the navigational links, and you should treat these as links to other pages, and treat them with that importance. Whereas the other list, although it may also contain links, those links aren't navigational links. They could be links to launch pop-ups, or links to external sites, or something like that.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. I've taken on a client who are helping out with a website they got built by someone else, and for some reason I know the reason why, but their website was appearing in Google search results with their footer menu being given prominence over the main navigation. So the fringe links were, showing up for their listing, for their organic listing. So things like, contact us, website designed by so-and-so, email us, and things like that. So they couldn't get their head around why that was happening. So after a quick browse over their coding for their website, a nav tag was used in the footer, but not in the main menu. And they're using a theme. And the fact that the theme isn't using the correct semantics within it is, that's alarm bell straight away. So that, I kind of figured out why that's happening, but whether or not it has any effect after I make any changes is another thing to look at. But yeah, that's a perfect example.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So these things, they are important. Yeah. So.
Yeah, the sections thing, I think we spoke about this last week or the week before, especially when you've got really, really long websites, or one-page websites, that scroll on and on and on. And my sort of rule was to only include one H1 tag per page. And then, you mentioned that as long as you're using sections and you're defining sections clearly on that page, you can have more than one per section.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. So this is the thing. So I kind of, like, with the semantic side of things, I know the semantic HTML tags and when to use them, etc. But something like that, that was new to me. And you brought that up last week. So that's pretty cool that you can use multiple H1s and on the same page if you're using your sections right.
And if you just stop and think about it for a second, it makes total sense, because a section is basically like a new block of content, and there's it's like a chapter of a book. You wouldn't expect chapter 1 to have a nice, bold heading for its chapter title, and then every other chapter after that doesn't have one. You'd expect them all to look and feel the same as you're scrolling through a book. So if once you start a new section, then this is where I was saying just earlier about having multiple headers and footers. So you can have your whole site wrapped in a main element, which has a header and a footer. And then you can have a section, which can have a header and a footer, and then another section, header and footer. And each of those can have their own H1, H2, H3 hierarchy in there as well. So you can sort of structure your page as lots and lots of individual pages just by using the section tag to sort of break up that content. And one way I like to think about all this is, so when you've got a Word document and you're writing, say, a piece of work for school or something, and you're using the formatting options within your word processor. So you're setting your title. You're not just increasing the font and making it bold. You're actually defining it as a title 1 or heading 1, and then your paragraphs, you're defining those as normal text or whatever you've decided to name them. And then when you have got a smaller heading, you're not just decreasing the font size, you are assigning it as heading 2. essentially what you're doing is you're creating a HTML structure there.
Exactly.
And the nice thing is in Word or something like Google Docs or whatever, you have this like overview panel on the left where you can sort of look at your document structure, and all it does, it doesn't show you like every single part of your document. It just shows you the titles. It just shows you all the H1s and all the H2s and what other formatting options you've used. And that's the way I like to think of sort of HTML as well, is that by defining these headings and these sections, you're just basically creating this document structure, this document outline, which you can then get like a high level view of how your content is structured.
Right. Yeah. I think it's very similar to when you look back at if you went to university, you handed in a dissertation. There was some very strict guidelines as to what that dissertation should follow in terms of its presentation and layout. Even to the font size and double spacing and line heights and things like that. But I think the important things are, you're talking about your title, your main title, headings, subheadings, and then using bullet lists or bullet points and citation and quoting in the correct manner and things like that. So it's very, very similar to that. So when you think about it that way, so if you like from my background where I don't really think much about semantic HTML, I just kind of like go with it. If you take that sort of concept of how a dissertation should be structured for university, and take that concept and bring it forward to your web page, I think it sort of works hand in hand, and it's more easier to kind of understand. Because even to this day, like right now, I'm going for these HTML tags that we've got listed on our Trello board, and there's a few there I've not even seen. So it's crazy.
Yeah, I think as developers, when you're putting together a web page, it's sometimes you need to just get something down, just to sort of get a proof of concept out, and it is quick to just throw a bunch of divs on the page and just get your structure right, because the structure could change over time. So, if that's the case, then semantics are normally a bit of an afterthought, and it's very easy to just sort of forget about them. And the site is working, it's looking good, right? Let's get it live. But it's only a little bit further down the line when you're trying to maybe do some SEO, or you're trying to you're trying to sort of surface some particular content in some sort of social capacity, like on a sharing widget or something like that, when you realize that actually your content is not structured quite right and your search engines aren't seeing what they need to see.
Exactly.
And then you have to go and do all this rework. So it is good to have it front of mind, but I think it's one of those things that most people, it is a little bit a secondary step. Step one is just to get your content out first.
I think the way I approach it, I mean, when I create templates for a website using my own theme that I have, the semantics are in there to so the things like your header, main, your H1 through to your H6, but I never really get to H6. I mean, any page that I create usually only goes up to like H4, maybe a H5. So like footer and things like that. So everything like that is in there, but the rest of it is purely my personal opinion. I think the rest of it is all dictated by the content and the type of content that the page is going to have. So later on down the line, if the client decides to send over content for a new page, or let's just say for a blog post, they don't have any blog posts, and now they want to put a blog post on their website. So okay, we create the blog page layout for them, and then we kind of emphasize that this is an article. Then we use all the other semantical HTML tags to outline the fact that this is an article and there's an author attributed to it. There's citations in there. There's subscript, superscript, or anything like that. It's kind of then defined as and when the content's sent over. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is determined by the content as well. So until you've actually got some real content in your site, you're not going to know whether to use any of these elements. But it's these few sort of structural ones that are the most important, I think. Is the, like we've discussed, the header, footer, main, nav section. And then there's article and aside. Articles are an interesting one because I tend to use that one a fair bit now. If you go onto the podcast website, inspect.fm, each episode is wrapped in an article element.
Okay.
And the reason for that is because article is supposed to be used for like reusable content, so blog posts or obviously articles. It could be, you could wrap it around like a product page, for example.
Yep.
Which that product may appear in various different scenarios, like on a feed or in a basket page. So you can wrap an article around that as well. So it's just a way of defining like reusable content. And then the other one that's gets used a bit less is aside, which is a bit of a funny one because aside is supposed to be used as sort of secondary content to your main content. So the obvious one is like if you've got a blog and then you've got a sidebar. But it can also be like a side can also be used within an article. So you can have your main content of your article and then you can have an aside in your article.
Right.
So for like example, in an article, suppose you've got a bunch of headings and you've got quite a long form article. You may have a little table of contents just towards the top of the article, some links, which aren't navigational links necessarily, but they're just sort of links to anchor links further down the page. And that could be in an aside. Or if you've got an advert, if you're selling ads on your website, you could put your adverts in an aside. So it's not necessarily part of the article, but it's kind of linked to that article.
Okay.
Yeah, but that one I don't use it very much. I don't always have a good use case for it, apart from the sidebar.
The only time I'm ever using that is in the sidebar for a WordPress powered website on a blog page, because it's there by default. So I won't actively go and code that into any other template. I mean, unless it's required. So if another content page on the website, like About Us, requires a sidebar, which, has maybe some ads in there and, recent blog posts, then it will be thrown in there. But that very rarely happens. So, yeah, I mean, the first time I saw that was in a WordPress template, and it makes sense. It does make sense. So, it probably is a good idea to use it more to define your content.
Yeah, and I think the rest of the HTML sort of semantic tags are all fairly obvious when they should be used. You've got abbreviation tag, you've got an address, a block quote, you've got things like sub and superscript, keyboard. So you've got the KBD tag, which is supposed to be like text that's entered by user. But the one that's slightly not obvious is when you've got a bold and a strong, and then you've got italic versus emphasis, because they're both visually they both do the same thing.
Exactly.
And before strong was introduced, I don't know when that was introduced. It was pre HTML5. But obviously, if you wanted to make some text bold, you wrap it in a B.
Yeah.
But what's becoming more and more common now, especially with CMSs, is that they wrap it in a strong tag. Now, do you know what the difference is?
I was going over it, but I think it's one's to emphasize the importance and the others to highlight.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is that the bold tag is purely visual, whereas strong gives it some contextual emphasis as well.
Correct.
And the place where that will really take effect is if you're using like a screen reader, and if the screen reader is reading your text, and you've got a paragraph, a sentence with a bold word in the middle, wrapped in a B, wrapped in a bold tag, then the screen reader will just read that normally. Whereas if it's wrapped in a strong tag, then the screen reader should, in theory, just change its voice slightly to give it a bit more emphasis.
Essentially, it's the B and the I tags. They're not semantic. This is what I was reading.
No, they're not. They're purely decorative.
Visual. That's all it is. Yeah, and that was an interesting one because I was like, okay, what's the difference? So I think I'm going back to my website. Yeah, when you use a CMS, a rich text editor, it will use strong. But then I've gone back to some old websites where I've actually used B. And but it's a mixture of B and strong.
Yeah, again, it comes down to context. Do you want this text
Yeah.
to just look slightly bolder just because it looks nicer, or do you want it to sort of shout out a little bit? Do you want it to be bolder to create emphasis, and then you need to use the correct one, I guess. But I think if you're just using strong everywhere rather than bold, then you're probably in a safe place because all the CMSs seem to do that as well now.
Yeah, and I think from a SEO point of view, it's not frowned upon as well.
Yeah, it's just a shame that one of them's one letter and the other one's six. So
Exactly, yeah, that's a killer.
so again, it comes down to getting your code out quickly or getting it out cleanly. So if you're going for speed, then you probably will just type a B. Whereas if you want to be correct, then you should try and use a strong wherever possible.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, so that kind of covers all of the sort of semantic tags. Do you use any tools that you've got to sort of test your code or make sure that you're writing things properly? I've got one.
I've used which one have I used? So apart from the W3C validator, there's a browser add-on I was using when I was using Firefox to build websites, and it's just, I think it's called Semantic Checker. And what that does is like your Chrome inspector, so your DevTools inspector, it highlights everything using different colors, and it kind of like notifies you of anything that's missing as well. So it kind of advises you that you could also add this, and this to the page. I was using that a while ago, and then there's Outliner that I've used for Chrome. But to be honest with you, I tend to, when I'm carrying an SEO check or on-page SEO check, 2 or 3 of the SEO checking tools that I subscribe to actually sort of generate a report and provide quite a lot of information about the semantic data on the page. So I tend to just go with those now, and they're paid for sort of tools that I use. They're not cheap, and I'm purely using it for on-page SEO, just to make sure pages are loading quickly enough and file size is all good, and we've got deferring in there, synchronous loading of scripts and things like that. But the other clever part is it does actually give you a massive report on your semantic HTML. I can't remember the names of the ones I'm using, but I think it was SEO Site Checker is one that I'm using. But yeah, that's what I'm using.
Okay, yeah. Well, if you can dig out some of those links, we could put them in show notes afterwards.
Yeah, definite.
Yeah, the main one I use is a Chrome extension called HTML5 Outline. Is that the same one that you just mentioned, possibly?
Yeah, Outliner for Chrome, yeah.
Yeah, which is really good. So essentially what it does, you just click on the extension and it adds, what it's doing in the background is it adds a bunch of IDs to all of your HTML5 elements that it finds. And then it uses those IDs to sort of generate the report. But what it does is it finds all the H1s, the articles, the sections, and so forth, and it lays them out in a sort of an indented tree sort of structure.
Yeah.
So you can quickly see that. Okay, I've got a title for my blog post, and I've got it as a H2, for example. And then you click on Outliner, and if that H2, that title, is appearing maybe further indented than it should be, then you've probably got something wrong in your actual sectioning elements. So then maybe that H2 is scoped wrong within your HTML. So it's a bit hard to explain, obviously, on an audio podcast, but it's definitely worth checking out. And if you just go onto like some of your existing work that you've done, or some pages that you visit often, and just click on it and just see how that page is structured, and you'll get quite quickly an idea of the way this thing works. One thing that it does do, though, is it expects to have a heading inside each sectionable content. So a sectionable content is not just the section tag, it's also the main tag and the nav. And I don't know if this is a sort of a hard and fast rule, but really all of those, they should have a heading in them. If you've got a section, it should have a header, and a header should always have a heading inside it. Whether that heading is visible or not, that doesn't matter. But in terms of just to attach a label to it. So for an example, if I go to the Inspect website and I just run this outliner on the homepage, what I do is I get the H1 is the title of the site, so it says inspect, and then indented is giving me an untitled nav, because I've got a nav element around the main navigation of the site, but there's no heading inside that nav, so then it's untitled. So really what I should do to get rid of that error, it's not an error, but to that warning, is to put a heading inside the nav and then just with CSS just hide it.
Exactly. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I've got an example as well. So WordPress by default always attaches, I think it's a heading tag to every single page. It gives it a H1 by default, and it exists on every single page, on your single post template, on your index page template. And what I tend to do is I write some CSS to hide all of these things that I don't require because I don't use them. And then what I do is I bring in my own sort of like heading and H1 tags into the template myself. So I know I see what you're talking about, and that's exactly what I do with WordPress, because there's a lot of stuff it kind of displays which I don't need. And then upon running, this is a weird thing actually, I run a SEO check on one of these sites I was working on, and it picked up 2 H1 tags on the website, on the homepage. And I found that really strange that it was doing that, although it was one of them was hidden using display none. And so I found out that it was actually being generated in the actual theme template. So I had to go and find that template part and change that H1 or remove it. So yeah, I see how that happens, and yeah, I do tend to kind of like just remove the stuff that's not needed.
Yeah, and this HTML outline Chrome extension will make that quite visual, because you'll have basically all the way to the left of your tree, your document tree, you'll have 2 entries because they're both H1s. So you'll quickly be able to see. And if you wanted the second one to, if that was intended to be indented as a H2 level, then you either need to wrap it in another section, or you need to change it obviously to a H2.
What's your take on? So I saw a conversation between some developers on Twitter, like I always do. What's your take on giving your heading classes different names depending on their size? So H2 large, H2 medium, and H2 small, appearing within the same section on the same page.
I try and avoid giving class names things like large, small, medium. I try not to make my classes represent the way they look, but rather represent the way they're used, for example. So I would try and avoid having a class on a button which says like big red button, right? But then I may have a class which is primary call to action button, for example. And then that will be styled in that way. Generally, I try and avoid having classes on headings as well, unless I really need to target a specific one for some reason. And I try and just let the hierarchy of the headings be defined. Define the sizes. And by using these sort of sectioning elements, you can do that as well, because you could have a H2 in a section, and you can have a H1 that's not in a section, and visually they may look the same because they're both rendering as a top level heading, if that makes sense. Yeah, again, this isn't great podcast content. It's something that you can only really see in an example.
Exactly.
But yeah, I would avoid using a class like H2 large. I would give it a more contextual class name, and then style it however you need to, really. One thing I had in a project that I'm currently working on is a request from the client actually is to make all headings on the website look the same, so they all visually look the same size, color, weight, everything.
I was just going to ask you about that.
Yeah, so it's a bit annoying because then when we need a heading which is slightly smaller, we then need to start introducing overrides. So blanket in the CSS file, we've got H1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 all given the same font size. So although they have got different meaning, semantically, visually they all look the same. So the team, the developers are still encouraged to use the correct heading where appropriate, but it's not going to look any different. And then if we need one to look slightly smaller, then we need to add a specific class onto that particular one and override it.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Which is a better way than obviously making all of the headings H1s or all of them H2s.
Yeah, definitely.
If that is your end goal is to have all your headings looking the same, but ideally, I'm not very keen on that approach. I'd rather have some visual hierarchy with my headings.
Yeah, and I think from an SEO point of view, I think Google and any SEO site checker that you're using I think it will pick up on that, and it will kind of probably give you a warning, not a red warning, but probably that amber warning saying your heading tags are the same size, and to give prominence to the most important one.
Yeah, it's important for the user as well, just to know what they should be focusing on. When a user approaches a page, if there's some text that's slightly bigger and bolder, the eye's going to be drawn to that first.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. Well, that's everything that we've got on the list for semantics. I mean, it's not a very difficult topic. It's just something that all developers should really think about. If you are working on a project right now, just stop and think. Are you just wrapping everything in a div just for speed's sake, or can you structure this content to give it some proper meaning, especially if it's something like a blog where it's got lots of text and maybe different levels of hierarchy in the text as well. Now's probably the good time to just take a step back and just try and structure your content properly.
Yeah, definitely, 100%.
All right, brilliant. Well, that wraps that up. Before we go, do you have any sort of recommendations for this week? Anything that you're watching or listening to, and anything you want to share?
Jumped on Stranger Things season 3.
Oh yeah.
I'm into, I think it was episode 4, and if you've seen season 1 and 2, you're going to love Stranger Things season 3. It's really good.
Yeah, I haven't started it yet.
You haven't? Oh, it's brilliant. It is really good. One that a lot of people or listeners will be surprised about is I've just started watching Lost.
Okay, I've never seen Lost, so you're one.
You haven't seen it either? Well, I've just blitzed through seasons 1 and 2, and I'm on season 3 now. And this thing, have you ever seen Prison Break?
Not really. I've seen a couple of episodes out there.
It's very, very similar. It's just like there's a twist and a story and everything sort of connected, and there's another twist and there's another twist. It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. So
I think when those sorts of series came out, Lost and Sopranos and a few of the other sort of classic ones, I was never really into watching TV series back then. I only really got into them after watching Breaking Bad. That was the one that sort of broke me in, I guess. So I do at some point need to go back and watch some of these classics.
Yeah, I'm glad I jumped on that now, because it's really old. So yeah, that's pretty cool. I jumped on that one. What else was there? I think the usual podcasts or vlogs that I watch on YouTube, the conspiracy guys. Apart from being hilarious, the host is just bloody hilarious. But the content that he has and the stuff he talks about is just brilliant. So they talk about all kinds of conspiracies, conspiracy theories, and true crime. I'm really interested in true crime. Mm-hmm. That one's a good one to I think definitely get involved if you've got the time for it. Some of his episodes are about 2 hours long.
Okay.
But there's a lot of banter involved, so definitely one to check out.
All right, cool. My recommendation is this website called Poolside FM. So
I saw your post on that.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. It's basically the website is designed like an old interface, and it's meant to look like something straight out of the 80s. And essentially, what it is, it's just a music. It's just an internet radio station. In the background, I've done some digging around in the code and stuff. It's basically a SoundCloud playlist in the background, which is being streamed through this nice looking interface. And it's just like sort of mainly house tunes, but quite sort of funky, the sort of thing that you would hear when you're on holiday sitting by the pool. And yeah, it's just brilliant. It's just a brilliant playlist. It's the branding is on point. And the guys that have made it, there's these couple of guys from France, and there's one from Poland, I believe. They've also done another site called Foreign Rap. So if you're into hip hop and you're into maybe some non-English hip hop, then it's worth checking this one out, because It's got filters for different countries, and Foreign Rap, what it does is it's not just a playlist, it plays the videos, YouTube videos.
Nice.
And they're sort of full screen in the background. And the cool thing is they've also got an Apple TV app, so you can have these videos playing on your Apple TV.
Oh, brilliant.
So yeah, check out those two, Poolside FM and foreignrap.com, I believe it is. Yeah, .com. And they're both by the same or similar people, some of the same people. Yeah, excellent.
Sounds good.
All right, wicked. So that's it for this episode. If you liked what you heard, then do hit subscribe in your podcast player and leave us a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts so other people can sort of find this. And the best thing that you can do is actually just share this with your friends. If you want to get in touch with us, you can get us on Twitter at InspectFM, and there you can find links to our personal Twitter accounts as well. And the show notes for this episode and all the archive is going to be on the website at inspect.fm, where you can also listen to the show on your desktop if you want to. So until then, we'll catch you next time.
Yeah, see you then.
Bye.